All right, everyone, welcome to the Police Reform and Reinvention Collaborative Committee meeting for Thursday, December 3rd of 2020. Hope everyone had a great Thanksgiving. Hope everyone's doing well. We're going to kick things off with anyone have any comment on old business, basically from our last discussion on Section 2 of the Police Reform Workbook. And I will hand everything over, as I like to do, to Chief Carroll to run the show and start there. So if anyone wants to bring anything up or address, I know there were some emails and references, some questions as well during the week too. So this is the forum if anyone would like to jump in.
We were going to pick. I mentioned at the end of the last meeting, if you don't mind.
Please go ahead.
We were gonna be able to at least start. I think we ended off kind of like at page 23, and I just wanted to, because I had a couple of questions regarding some of those. So I just wanted to make sure that we were able to start there.
You have the floor, so to speak. Go ahead.
I do? Oh,
yeah,
okay.
Sure.
Last week we had started to talk about community policing. And actually I had a couple of questions regarding what was in the manual, how logistically things would be determined. For instance, on page 23, I guess my question is, how does one train an officer to overcome distrust? That has to be really difficult. Because it's part of what's in the manual. So I was just really, how does one train anybody to overcome distrust? I should probably go right to, let me go to page 23 and let me see where it brings it up. It's under, I'm sorry, I'm looking for the precise language. There's some community policing practices, and then there's a list of them. For instance, create a comprehensive community policing strategic plan, train all personnel in community policing, including overcoming distrust. So I was just curious how that is even accomplished anywhere. Have you heard of anything, Chief Carroll, about that?
I haven't heard anything specifically about that. My thought would be, I go back to personnel selection. Culture, community they work in, the environment they work in.
Yeah, I guess, I mean, you get to determine, where is there, how do we determine if there is a distrust that we need to train someone to overcome? It's just, I love these bullet points. I really do. And I think they're great. I wanted to understand how we determine them and how we actually are able to see them through. So it's just something for all of us, I think, to look at and think about, because I think it is kind of important, especially when we're dealing with cultural differences and things like that. Sometimes distrust is just an inherent part of that because there's lack of familiarity, lack of, any exposure or experience. So I guess that kind of, distrust is a very strong word, but it could be, how do you overcome uncertainty? That leads to distrust. I guess that's another way to think about it, because I don't want to necessarily use that word distrust. It's so negative. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think we can pick out the stuff in the guide that we want to focus on,
okay,
more important, bigger issues.
Sure.
Giving thought to it. Does implicit bias, help that?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that probably does go a long way to it. So it's just a matter of, I guess, revisiting that, fairly regularly, but I guess bias training is something that should be fairly regular anyway. So maybe it would work itself out. It was just a question I had when I read it. And then the success of community policing, it says in here, it should be measured and reevaluated. And I guess I just, how do we measure and how do we reevaluate? How frequently to reevaluate it? I mean, I guess this kind of gets into the conversation last week about having another group of people, I guess, that is looking at this, just from the outside in, whether it's once or twice a year or something like that. But I just, how do we accomplish that? Because like I said, I think these bullet points are very good. It's just a matter of actually accomplishing them and continuing to see them through. And I think that's something that we have to really think about. How are we going to do that?
Chief,
I guess I would go back to, like I said, like, you know, I think we're on the same page, community outreach program.
Uh-huh.
You know, semi-annual, I don't know, 4 times a year, twice a year meeting, and community survey.
Okay. And what about incorporating?
I'd like to just say, as you pointed something out, I actually like to highlight something that Officer Craig said when in the first week when I asked, what do you actually do? Like, what's the how? And he had like a whole list of things that he does to establish trust. So, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
so I think that the question is great, but perhaps it's good to ask the question so that people can detail a little bit more what they are actually doing, because he was doing it.
Yeah, but it's not just, and you're right, but it's not just, you know what, I think I was looking at it kind of flipped over. I agree with you. He was indicating how he tries to put the community at ease in trusting him. I'm actually looking at it from the police officer's point of view. I mean, the police officer gets into a lot of situations. It's a difficult job where how can that police officer, when I'm thinking about training, overcoming distrust, how is a police officer trained to overcome distrust of the people he's also, you know, policing? And to a certain, you know what I mean? It's kind of a flip on it, because I think the reason I question that is because I think that may actually have a lot to do with how the police officer interacts with people in general, or a particular group of people. I don't know, but it's just something I wanted us to think about.
So overcoming the police officer's distrust of the community, that's what you mean?
Yeah, or groups. I mean, and again, I think Carol kind of got to it. It's the bias training, I think, is really helpful to that. So yeah, that's what I was getting at with that question. I kind of flipped it. And then the only other question I had there was, how are the community policing measures, how would they be incorporated into a police officer's performance evaluation? How is that done with inside?
I can get to personnel evaluations a little later if they're in the section. We can talk about stuff. But you know,
so then if that's it, if you want to go, if you're going to address it later on, we can jump into your section and you can take the lead. Yep. If that works. Sure. Kim, are you done with? I just lost Kim on my page. Where is she? Oh, any other questions? I don't want to cut you off.
No, you know what? Later on, I'll just go through what my other notes were, because I had jumped ahead in a lot of notes. So yeah, it's fine. Thank you.
Okay. All right, Chief. Now the floor is yours. I
think we're back to use of force. I read it, and I think you had your notes. Is there any questions on the policy itself?
Can you just direct me to like what page we're at? Kind of we're you know, somewhat reviewing, just so I can be on the.
I think we're at page number 3, about halfway down, two-thirds of the way down.
Oh, section 3. Oh, you're talking about what section you sent 2, around. I'm sorry.
Yes.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was looking at the handbook itself. Okay, great. Thank you.
Like I said, it's modeled after the MPTC policy, and our last review was conducted by during accreditation.
Can you just briefly explain what is that accrediting agency?
Accreditation.
What do they require again? What's their minimums or?
Sure. Let me see.
If you don't have it, it's not that. You can get it later. It's not urgent.
Yeah, so it includes an accreditation program, enables us to strengthen existing procedures and simultaneously creating a solid foundation for the agency's future. The benefits include independent confirmation that policies comply with professional standards, assurance of fair recruitment, selection, promotion processes, diminished vulnerability to civil lawsuits and costly settlements, enhanced understanding by agency personnel of agency policies and procedures, greater administrative and operational effectiveness, and greater public confidence. And you know, only of the 542 police departments in the state. Only 116 are accredited. So about 20% of our one. We talked about pretextual stops, talked about quotas. We have the policy about shooting at moving vehicles. We have a whole policy about high-speed pursuits. SWAT teams, we talked about that. The no-knock endorsement, I think we had a lengthy conversation on that already. Tasers and pepper sprays, we have both of them. They're part of the use of less lethal options, and we have policies directly dealing with them.
Do you keep track whenever a taser or pepper spray discharged or used?
Yes, they're required to report it. Even if they draw it and have an accidental discharge, it's required. Talked about summonses versus warrantless arrests, and Harvey sent a nice email about that. We talk about diversion programs. Anybody see something they want to talk about? Let's bring it. We can bring it up. Hotspot.
Chief, could you expand on the term appropriate? Criminal summons are used when appropriate. Go into a little bit more detail about that.
So, did you see my email response?
Yes.
Okay. But so they're supposed to be used during traffic violations, violations of town ordinances, and other penal law violations. But there could be a time when an officer felt that his safety, or the public safety, was better served by processing this someone at headquarters. Prior to doing that, he would have to run the circumstances by a supervisor who would have to also agree, and then bring him in.
Okay, so it's a subjective judgment
based upon his training and experience. Yes,
I realize there's some situations where, like, if you have one person in a car and he has no license, that you can't identify let him know then. But in other situations where there's discretion, it's totally subjective then.
It is.
Okay.
But it would have to be approved.
Yeah. Is there a bias or a standing policy not to make an arrest if it can be avoided?
It's the nature of cops. So we always try to mediate and solve something without arresting somebody. I always say, like, if we never had to arrest anybody again, the entire career I'm chief, I'd be happy. It's just not, going to happen. But yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Steve, could you say more? You just said something. So you said, we always would rather not arrest people.
It's true.
Okay. Why? Say more. Why?
That means society is in a good spot, right? There's nothing happening that we require it. No bad guys, no.
So does that mean that your department or disposition is to avoid that unless it's really absolutely necessary? Is that what you mean?
We would try to mediate something first. But there are some mandatory sections that we have to, especially with domestic violence laws. Okay. But dependent. I mean, if we're talking a felony, chances are that we're going to make an arrest on that. I can rarely think of an occasion. I don't know. Maybe if it's a larceny of some sort and restitution was made ahead of time. But it's hard to look at everything. You almost have to look at every individual incident before you could make the decision.
Okay. And for those who don't know, and I'm sure we've brought it up, but those who don't know, with the new laws, not everyone is processed. Most people are given appearance tickets and not bail eligible crimes. So on many crimes, what before would have been held in the city and central booking or here potentially see a judge, many of those crimes are now just processed with an appearance ticket, you're fingerprinted, and given a date to return to court. So it's less intrusive.
We talked about de-escalation strategies, investigation into hate crimes, community engagement.
you also said it's something that kind of, I have to tell you, I was impressed. Weekly training. The staff, the police officers get weekly training.
Weekly online video training. Yep. Yep. It's usually about, I don't know, 6 to 10 minutes.
Oh, okay.
But you know, also, you know, I mean, there's training every day. If a supervisor observes some type of, you know, behavior or mistake, or, you know, and sometimes we have certain roll call training.
Uh-huh.
You know, the whole idea that you mention it every day and it becomes like in the forefront of somebody's mind, you know, that particular, whatever that's, you know, that was raised that morning or at the beginning of the shift. They do it with DPW as well. They call it safety minutes. Yep. And they do it every day before they go out. And it helps. It's just a short little snippet, but it works.
Yeah, we call it roll call. And it's 15 minutes before the tour starts. The guys sit down with the supervisor, they get their assignments. They review the blotter, what's been going on in town. Something like a training issue could come up, a mistake made. And we also talk about referral checks, you know, areas that are requiring, you know, this house was burglarized, you know, do extra checks to, you know, for the next week or so to make the homeowner feel confident and maybe hopefully come up with a clue or see something else. So that's how they start their day.
Let me ask you, the video training, the 6 to 10 minutes of weekly video training, who puts that out?
It's called Daigle. It's by the Daigle Law Firm. It's a former police officer who became a well-known attorney and dealing with legal updates and overall police performance.
So,
just
sorry, go ahead, Vince.
Yeah, just one thing that occurs to me is that when it comes to bias, it's, you know, even training videos can be biased. And I'm wondering if, you know, they get audited by somebody with an eye towards anti-racism or even that could happen. Like, just see if there's something there, because there could be subtle messages that are part of it without people really intending it even.
I review them also, and so do my lieutenants, and I haven't seen that, you know. And if I could see if I could share one, to give an example.
It'd be interesting. I'm just curious about it too.
Are we ready to move on to community engagement?
Yes.
So I understand what the role, I think I understand what the role of the department is. What is the role of the community? What should the community also be taking an active role in ensuring engagement with the police department?
That my hope is one of the things we come out of with after this review is the community outreach programs.
But I just wonder if it needs to be if it's a one-way street or if it's a two-way street. I mean, should I don't know, you know, I'll say the town board only because I don't know, you know, the structure of the town well enough, I guess. Should the town board be suggesting to members of the community that when they see a police officer, that they stop and say hi and introduce themselves, or, you know, something like that, so that it's not only outreach by the police department, but outreach by the community to the police as well.
Community in reach.
Perhaps, yeah.
That'd be great.
I mean, it just seems to me that there needs that it has to be a two-way street. It can't only be that the police are reaching out and the community is not. You know, if there's not an active engagement and consciously doing so, you know, it's kind of like my getting to know the people at Starbucks, you know, because then, you know, they're more likely to say, "Good morning, Martha," which makes me feel good and it makes me feel acknowledged. And so, you know, I've learned their names as well. So, you know, it's kind of, and that's on like, you know, a micro level, but it just seems like there should be more of an ongoing engagement on both sides. And I know during this time of COVID, that's harder to do, but maybe that's something to strive to do down the road, to really have, to do something more purposeful on the part of the community to reach out also to the police.
Unfortunately, Martha, the only kind of outreach we normally get is when somebody's having a bad day.
Right? I know, and that's exactly, and that's what it would be wonderful to change, right? So that at Community Day, it's a great opportunity that, for, I always go by and say hi, but, a lot of the department knows me. So, that kind of is de minimis in some ways, but, I think that for other people, it just would be great if we can encourage members of the community to be more outgoing and more intentional about going up and saying, hi, good afternoon, I'm so-and-so and I live on so-and-so, and just want to come up and introduce myself to you and thank you for your service to our community, whatever it is. And that doesn't cost a thing.
No, I think, when this is over, we go back to doing our coffee with a cop, maybe an open house, some of those kind of things.
One thing that might be neat to see if we could set up or how we could get this started is, I know that not everybody in Newcastle lives in a neighborhood, but a lot of people do, and they have, neighborhood associations, whether they're formal or informal. Mine's formal in a certain sense that we all belong to the association, but it's pretty relaxed. But we have a block party every year, and it would be neat to invite a cop to your block party, and then somebody could kind of walk around and just introduce themselves. We always at the block party, we take a few minutes and talk about neighborhood issues, which is things like putting your trash cans out at the right time and making sure you don't speed through the neighborhood, like that kind of thing. It's it's pretty quaint, but it would be neat to invite a police officer to come and introduce himself around to people in a sort of more relaxed social setting.
Great idea. And if there's food, they will come.
Yeah, there's food. There's really good food.
Well, and I think one of the ways it has worked well, Chief, is when for Columbus Day and St. Patrick's Day, that the officers go to the senior center and serve food and interact with the people there. They don't just serve the food. They say, how you doing? They chat with them. They know some of them by name, and it's wonderful. I mean, the first time I saw that, I was like really surprised that that people knew each other, and that some of our older residents really do know who the police officers are, if not by name, certainly by sight. And I think that's such a positive thing to do. And I was very impressed the first time I was involved in that. So,
and credit is due. That's the union that does that. It's not from the police department.
Oh, is that okay?
Yeah. No.
It just
no. I'm sorry.
Part of the community, but I just want to,
yeah.
We have a couple of PA members, and I just want them to get the credit for doing it.
Yeah, because it's great.
Sometimes it's the town. Caveat.
Can I just, really? I think ideally, that's ideally a great idea, having the community be actually making affirmative movements to interact and invite the police. But the one issue that we're here to address, however, is that, in general, the BIPOC community wants to avoid the contact. So it's not as though, a particular person is going to reach out necessarily on their own. We somehow have to get communities or the groups of people that the BIPOC people are, for the most part, associate with or interact with, get them to do the inviting. And we have to somehow get over that little hump, because that's really one of the basic reasons why this was put together.
Right.
Their desire to, to avoid all contact. So somehow we've got to come up with a community-based interaction that will get them on board. So we have to think about that.
Yeah, right.
Kimberly, just to, can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. So I think that is a broad assumption that we're all dancing around. And every proposal we make basically centers around more involved police interactions. What does community policing really mean? For a huge percentage of the population, what they do want is diminished interactions with the police. We're taking it for granted that the police has to be involved in almost every facet of a person's life. And maybe what we really need to encourage is just diminished interactions in general. You know, we know for a fact that there is a whole program called the 7-Year Project, because Black men live on average of 7 years less than white men. And it's not just lifestyle choices. It's a lot of it are stress factors. And dealing with the police is inherently stressful for a certain portion of the population. I would like to encourage you to shift the lens a little bit, and instead of focusing on increased interaction, what can we do to have diminished interactions with the police?
I don't actually know what to say. I think sure.
I think that needs a bit more unpacking, Hermione. Because there's when I hear you say less interaction with the police, I'm making a guess here. I'm just checking it out. You can correct me, but my guess is that the interactions have been so negative that there is a wish that I would just be left alone, kind of thing. Just leave me alone and let me live my life and don't interact with me the way this has gone on. So is that kind of the source of that diminished interaction?
That is a part of it. We know that sometimes the police we spoke about it last week. You get pulled over. Where are you coming from? Just, nonsensical questions. I don't want to be pulled over. I just want to live my life and go about my daily business without those punitive questioning. It goes even wider afield. For example, should the police even be involved in revenue generation for the municipality and the state? Should they be involved in speed traps, for example? It goes beyond just let me live my life on a daily basis without the interactions, the uninvited interactions, the prying, things that could lead to broken window policing. Just we need to focus on diminishing those things. If I am perfectly comfortable hanging out at the farmers market with the police officers, but I don't want the interactions to be forced.
Right. So I don't think anyone was suggesting that they be forced. I think that they were suggesting that for those individuals in those neighborhoods who want other opportunities to engage with the police and have it be a two-way street so that the community, their neighborhoods are comfortable with the police and the police are comfortable with them, that these are avenues that they can pursue. If this is something that you never wanted to pursue, entirely your right and your privilege. I am curious as if we are steering off course a little bit here, because you're speaking about things that are encompass more than Newcastle, where I think we
Can I just
speaking about things outside of I'm sorry, Joanna, you go for it.
Okay. So with all due respect to everything that's been said, what I'm taking away from this conversation is that I don't think we can use this whole police reform as a cookie cutter for all neighborhoods all over America. And I think it would better serve us if we chose what would work in our town, in our community. And while we are talking about community engagement and community interaction with the police, the one thing which comes to my mind, and which is an example in our town, is when there was a young man who was walking downtown, a Black man, and a lady felt uncomfortable and felt he didn't belong. And I believe she called the police and asked them to come and check him out. That would be, for me, interaction and engagement. So Chief, how would you say, what would you do in a circumstance like that? How would your officers react to a call where someone said, oh, there's a Black man walking about in town and we don't think he belongs here? So, that's something which has happened over here. So I would rather focus on that and try and not make it cookie cutter and say what might work somewhere else should work for us as well. If we just took it town by town and see what worked for our town, I think that would really help us do this reform bit we're all doing. So Chief, I asked the question to you, how would you react if, that happened over here?
I think it did happen here, right? I think that's what you said. And I do remember the incident. I think we need to interview the person who made the call to see exactly her reasons for a concern. I think the officer has to make a decision whether or not he needs to ask the person of color how they are, engage them in a conversation, make a determination. He can ask them for their pedigree information. I think we also should be able to tell him that he doesn't have to give it to us, and then move on.
So in the case like that, the complaint made, the police department is in the position they have to respond to it.
Well, what happens if we don't, and
right.
Something terrible happens, like a kid gets kidnapped, right? What happens there?
Yeah. So if we're understanding it correctly, Chief, the first inquiry is not to just go to the person who is the alleged offender in any way, and in this case doing nothing. It's to go to the accuser to ascertain the veracity of what they're saying and whether or not there's any violation or crime of any kind.
Correct.
And Chief, with the changes, the changes and the subtleties of the laws in the last several months, are we keeping? Is the police department keeping track of callers who call in making certain complaints that are predominantly bias related or could be looked at as such? I mean, we know we have at least a couple of instances in our immediate past that this has happened. And if it may be significant to know who's calling on a regular basis for very similar allegations.
We ask everyone to give their name and phone number and address who calls in. They don't have to though, but we ask them to. So yes, it's all kept in. It's all in our department record management system.
It's just that under the new I think it's the executive order that Cuomo signed, people who are making these calls into the police department that are basically strictly bias related, they are potentially eligible for some type of interaction with the police themselves.
That is correct. That was after that New York City case, right? Yeah.
Right. So that's my point. I mean, I think it's kind of necessary I think it's going to be mandatory for people to make those complaints, those types of complaints. It's going to be mandatory to find out who they are, because I think it's really important to keep a log of that. Because how are we going to know if this is potentially, a biased call if we don't know who's calling and they do it on a regular basis?
I think the incident you're talking about, though, the caller was the victim in that kind of circumstance, right?
No, I'm talking about other cases.
Well, I can't force somebody to give us their name and phone number. And if it's a minor report, we don't have the time or resources to investigate. If they could block their phone number, they could do a million things to prevent us from finding out who they are.
It's just a problem. I mean, I'm not sure how that's going to be enforced then.
But I'm sort of curious, like, we're a small town. Like, I bet you know who your frequent flyers are. Like, right? Like, don't you know who the people are who call kind of frequently about certain issues? I mean, you know, it almost seems to me that I bet the people who are answering the phones kind of know instinctually.
We know, and yes. And, you know, I don't know or remember any frequent flyers other than one that's recently been pointed out to me that are doing this on a regular basis. But I can give you an example of what, you know, our town has done, though. You know, they've called about a suspicious Black person in a neighborhood. And I think Officer Davenport responded, and when he called up, he said, be advised, he's has a Con Ed hat on, a Con Ed truck, and he's flagging. You can't make it up. So something like that, we didn't have to interview him or talk to him. We just moved on. So it happens. It's crazy.
Yeah. So there's the racism right there. So with these examples, it's part of the town. And so you said something, Chief, that was, I think, useful. When a call comes in, you say now you have to respond in a case where the person is a Con Ed worker. You don't have to do anything. But let's say this person is visiting town and he's walking toward the library. Like, he's just walking toward the library. And you said that the police officer will have to stop him because a call has come in, and he has to evaluate the risk that this person walking to the library is causing.
It's a balance.
There it is, right? So we can expect in a town that has this issue, there are people in this town who are going to call the police on Black people who are walking, and Black people are going to be subjected to being questioned on the street.
There's no reasonable suspicion to talk to somebody who's just walking down the street. That's the thing. Just because somebody made a phone call. I don't know.
Is that true?
You know, you can't stop him, question him, or frisk him, but you can engage him in conversation.
Okay, so I'm again going to challenge the conversation because I'm reading, you know, all about community outreach, and it says for community engagement, it's imperative to form trust between officers and citizens in the neighborhood they police. I know, Chief, that you went on to say you were working on community outreach plans, a citizen advisory board and committee, a partnership with community organizations and faith communities, partnering with students and schools, and police community reconciliation. So what would you say the police's relationship with the newly formed CRE is? How was that taken into context when you and your team, you know, heard that there was a CRE which was going to be formed in our community? Did you think that there was a need for that, or did you think we were doing just fine before we had the CRE?
I think it was a great idea. And I actually had a meeting with the CRE where Kimberly drilled me for 2 hours. But I think it went very well. I support it. And I think we're going to have another meeting in the future with some suggestions or some things that they've come up with.
So there's one thing that when I just in this conversation about
can I also just interject too? And I welcome talking to the community. Town board has invited me twice, I think now, to address the community, and I think it was both of them were positive.
Because I've interacted with, you know, while I've had, and I think it's necessary for us to have like real life experiences, so I can talk from this. So while I've had the CRE booth at the farmer's market, and I've stood aside the police booth, which, you know, has come up, and I've seen the interaction between the town members and the police, and it's been wonderful. I mean, you know, there's a lot of bonhomie which goes on over there, and then it kind of gets guarded when I've seen my Black friends they like want to say hello. And even if you're, you know, the policeman over there who, like, you will have like a Black policeman over there, it's still not the same as to when there's a relationship with a white person saying hi to a Black cop. It's like Black people don't have that relationship with cops, even if they are Black. And I've seen it and I've witnessed it. So I just want to know, like, why does this happen?
You know, I think during this whole process, I've realized that, you know, and Martha's pointed out, there is an implicit bias in many ways, right? It goes the other way. You know, there are people in the community that have implicit bias against police. They're afraid, or, you know, that. So I don't know the solution, but that's what I believe it is. And I don't know what the reason for it. It could be as legitimate, valid, but implicit bias can go both ways, I believe.
Well, that's really not implicit bias. If you're avoiding the police because you've had a bad experience, that's not right. Implicit bias. That's experience.
But does everyone who is uncomfortable with the police had a bad experience?
No.
I don't know.
But there could be other reasons, like being uncomfortable with people who enforce the rules. You know, like because cops are in the position of enforcing the rules.
I kind of feel like this gets back to the point that Hermione was making earlier, which I thought was really interesting, and just the idea that for BIPOC residents, like engagement with police officers translates into being pulled over and having a negative experience. It translates into, you know, being asked, why are you walking down the street? It translates into all of that's where their mind goes to, whether or not that's actually occurred, you know, but that's where their mind goes, right? Whereas, you know, for me, maybe my thought is I'm seeing somebody help my kid cross the street, like my mind goes to a different place, right? And so, you know, when Hermione says, I don't actually want more engagement, I want less engagement, because for me, engagement looks like this, right? Like what I'm thinking is, how do we flip that paradigm so that the engagement that BIPOC residents of our community have isn't the negative engagement and is more of the positive engagement? How do we create more of these opportunities for positive engagement? And I think that's what we're trying to come, you know, Johanna, I think that's what we're trying to get to is, you know, if the farmers market has been a wonderful opportunity for people to have a positive engagement with police officers, you know, in the instance where they were, you know, co-located in the booth with the CRE, how do we create more of those opportunities?
Which is what I think I was trying to get to in my initial question about it going both ways.
Right. And you know, I discussed some of the things that I'd like to do, and I think those will help. And I think it's putting ourselves out there, or my officers out there, and being around. I think that, and right, and like you say, if we're there to be approached, at least we got half of that done, you know. And maybe the more we're there and the more we're seen approached by people, it would encourage people the next time to do it. I don't know. But I think community day, right? Farmers market, like I said, coffee with a cop, all these things will help.
I would say I'm just going to ask this question. I don't know if this is the right thing to do, or if even it's possible to do, but it would seem to me, and this is kind of consistent with the executive law order, should the town or Newcastle Police Department, or both, say something public on the website about calling the police because somebody is Black is not like somehow, like that's an anti-racist move, because we have identified that there are people in town who will call the police on people for being Black. We know that. You have evidence. So how do we counter that? I don't have an answer, but I think that's a fact.
We're assuming that the general public knows about the executive order. And I'm not sure that they do, quite honestly. You know, maybe it's something that should be put on, you know, I'm not sure how to do it. Somebody with communication skills better than I would have to, you know, fashion it. But I think that's a great idea. Somehow getting it onto the town website, indicating, look, this is not acceptable. And now it's it's not really it's not legal. You can't do this.
Right.
It's not legal. This is a violation. So, you know, because most people aren't, you know, waiting at the edge of their seat to read the new statutes or executive orders that come down. So I would suggest that, you know, we put it out there, because most people don't know half of the laws on the books as it is. And that's kind of important and certainly poignant to what we're trying to determine here.
One of my
way to get at that.
One of my procedures is that we follow up with everybody who calls. So my officers can get the message out that way. And I know for a fact that. We interview you, we handle the complaint, and then we give you our findings.
I have to agree. I think that's a wonderful point which was just made. If we are here to make reform and make changes, and even the smallest way, if you know, we could somehow better communicate and put it on the website that, you know, if someone's calling in, I kind of agree that if we want to make change, that this would be a great way to start. Let's not try and, you know, go the big parts. These are small things which would make people feel so much more comfortable and feel like they belong. So, you know, I think it's a great idea if we could somehow implement that. And I don't know what you would have to do to go about that, if you would need like approvals from different departments, but maybe we can think about this and it would be a great change.
It would seem like actually in the Newcastle newsletter that goes out, kind of just as a reminder, you know, here's, in case you didn't know, you know, here's a fact you may not know, that there is a law in New York State now that, and then lay it out, you know. I mean, we talk about other laws that have come out on the books, I think, you know, that are included in the Newcastle newsletter. So maybe this needs to be there.
Yeah,
as
absolutely.
Well.
I'm happy to do it. I just probably need somebody to help me.
Thank you.
Help point me to the right executive orders and help give me some language around that. Maybe this group could do that.
I'm just wondering, I've been listening here for about an hour, and I wonder if there's, I don't know if 2 buckets is the right terminology, but there are procedural issues, and then there's what it seems to me to be perception issues. And so I can't really, are we trying to work on both of those? Is that what we're trying to work on? Because it seems we start with Newcastle, but then it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. So I just am trying to understand in terms of moving forward, are we working on both of those concerns, or are we hearing that more of the concerns that that we're discussing are perception issues rather than procedural issues, or the way that the Newcastle police are handling certain incidents when they're brought to their attention? I'm just trying to get that out there.
Perception. What's about our conversation strikes you as perception versus actuality?
Yeah, I when I'm hearing it, I maybe it's the way that the Newcastle police are perceived in the community, or the way that the police perceive themselves, or the different perceptions people have based on their experiences.
Right. And but we are telling you that those are things that actually happened or is currently happening. They're not perceptions, they're not anecdotes. Those are things that are actually happening within the community right now. And because they're not happening to you does not mean that they're not happening. Chief Carroll himself can attest to what I'm saying.
So when you're describing what, in terms of what you're talking about right now, when you're talking about an experience that you've had, is it related to a procedure? Because I'm trying, like, if we're going to go forward and we're going to address different aspects of the Newcastle Police Department, one of the things that we're hearing about is having better relationships, right? And ways to make that happen by integrating the police in certain ways in different aspects of the community, or not, based on your experiences. But then there are certain procedural things that we could also talk about that might need to be adjusted, right? So we talked about what happens when you pull someone over. We've talked about what happens when a call comes in and there's a complaint that's made based on what someone looks like. So I'm just trying to get a handle on how do we move forward and make some real changes based on what we're hearing today and what we've been hearing the past few meetings about people's experiences, about people's perceptions, and about procedures related to how the Newcastle Police Department does their work. So maybe there's 3 buckets. So I'm not invalidating anyone's experiences at all. I just think that there's different aspects of this that are really complicated that in order to move forward, I think we have to start to talk about some tangible steps that we can take.
Absolutely. But I would invite you to stop thinking about it as perceptions and rather than people's experiences. Perceptions tend to invalidate people's experiences. And I've been working on that for a long time, working with Chief Carroll on the CRE, working with the police and emergency services. We are hearing of the stories every day. So I would invite you to not think of it as perceptions rather than experiences. And for me, I'm totally ready to talk about the procedural part of it. But I would also not like to be invalidated.
So I just have to step in and say, Ms. Ackerman, I think it personally when someone uses the term perception, because we are all over here talking about real life experiences. And perhaps, you know, I would hope that you wouldn't think that we were just perceiving situations which were not realistic, because we are human and these are our lives which are being discussed. So perhaps we can go back and use another word, but I don't think the term perception was kind of well taken over here. You know, I definitely didn't take it well, so.
Okay, I stand corrected. I apologize if I offended anyone.
Just one thing, I think we have been doing procedural things. I mean, the suggestions, they are happening. So I'm confused by what you think isn't happening. Yeah, I think we are doing it.
I think this conversation is going to continue throughout the process. So I think maybe we should, you know, go forward. So we had some good ideas that came from this whole thing about how we can put ourselves out there. I think that's something that should be added to the collaborative, the outreach plans, the surveys. So I think all those things are going to help us at Newcastle Police Department. But I think we should also concentrate on, you know, we've identified stuff we want to help. Let's find some more stuff by going through this. Is everybody okay with me proceeding?
Yes.
Good to go.
I'm going to bring up the section 3. I hope you all reviewed it.
In all our spare time, you know?
Yeah, I know. Wrong one. Okay, I need your help. I know you can. So for today's meeting, oh, hold on. All right, section 3, fostering community-oriented leadership, culture, and accountability. So one of the questions was about promotion process, and it's outlined in our rules and regs under a certain section. In law enforcement, we have the 1 of 3 rule. So they take a test and you can only choose from one of the top 3 candidates. We also review a resume, their attendance and activity records, interview with the executive board, executive staff. Ultimately, we make a decision and I bring that person in front of the town board for their approval and appointment. And of our 12 supervisors, 3 are Hispanic and 1 is female. Personnel evaluations are conducted annually and they're required by accreditation. I outline the categories we have: attendance, written reports, communications, traffic enforcement, job knowledge / competency, dependability and initiative, job interest, attitude, and public relations. So that's kind of where we talk about the whole community policing part of it. Some incentives we have, departmental awards. It's hard in a small department because there's only so many promotions. So, you know, these are good, the awards. Also, you know, training, getting trained that officer likes, or they want to continue to grow in the law enforcement section. So training helps with the board. Diversity in hiring, you know, we're 69% white, 18% black, 13% Hispanic, and 13% female. So when should officers be required to report use of force to their supervisors? Again, it's outlined in our rules and regs. Does anybody want me to read these, or, you know, can we just look at them? What do you feel more comfortable with?
I think we can just look at them.
We can read them.
The whole thing.
Follow them in your notes. One internal review is required after use of force. Investigation by a supervisor, review by the patrol lieutenant and the chief. Does your department use external independent reviewers? Yep, the Attorney General is required to investigate and, if appropriate, prosecute cases in which a police officer caused the death of an unarmed civilian. Going to be expanded in 2021 to also include the death of armed civilians caused by a police officer, whether officers are on duty or off duty. That question continued. So the town board has the right to review any outcome of any personnel complaint. Does your department require officers' use of force reports during performance evaluations? Performance evaluations are used as an opportunity to discuss somebody's strengths and weaknesses, but we're such a small department. We know our officers and we know the complaints, so it would actually be identified very quickly. Does your department?
So it's a yes?
If it was an issue, it would certainly be noted on it.
So it's a yes.
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 Right. But it would have already been addressed, but yes.
Okay.
Sorry, I lost my place. So the Zoom part is actually getting in my way, so I'm trying to do something.
So feel your pain with that?
All right. Does your department leverage early intervention to prevent problematic behavior? Again, same answer as above. And so yes, and sick use is monitored.
Can I ask you a question, Chief?
Sure.
Has there been a situation that has come up that has surprised you? Or that you like really didn't expect? Because I mean, you're saying we're such a small department that we kind of know about what's happening before it's happened or right after it's happened. So I'm just wondering if there has been a situation either since you were chief or before you became chief that you kind of went, wow, I didn't expect that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I had an officer get arrested last year. So that was certainly one.
Okay.
We had an officer we hired, and 2 weeks later, we found out that he was believed to be involved in a hit and run accident somewhere else. So he's no longer with us, obviously.
So what did you learn from that? I mean, are there things that you can take from that experience that have helped you since then? Yes,
definitely. That I'm paid to make the big bucks, make the big hard decisions, and that protect the reputation and integrity of the department. And take nothing for granted with anyone. And the people make mistakes, all those things.
Well, they're human, so they're going to make mistakes. So, thank you. I was just curious what Thank you.
Okay. Does the department review central or near miss events? Does the department respond to questionable use of force with non-punitive measures designed to improve officers' performance? And we do have a firearms review board, if convened when necessary, and outlines that review board. But I did think at the end of it, after I read about it, maybe it could be a use of force and firearms review board. So that's something I think, maybe hopefully this group would think would be a nice change going forward.
I like that idea.
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Yeah,
excellent.
Chief, I noticed that there isn't a civilian on that board.
Yeah, this is an absolute internal process.
Okay. Would you consider adding a layperson to the board, or?
I don't support adding a layperson to a board like this. Now, that may be a decision that this group decides is different. It's very hard for a person not trained in law enforcement or in arrest and cuffing and how difficult those things are to make a decision without the experience of someone on that board.
Right, but can we consider that, how do I want to say this? Someone who brings the experience of a civilian might be beneficial to this board?
It could be the town board because they have a right to review a personnel complaint, right? Oh, this isn't personnel, but maybe that's something we talk about.
Right, I don't remember if that was the part. I remember reading where it was written like, if the town board requests to review it, and maybe it wasn't this section. I read the whole.
I think you're right, Hermione, but what I'm saying is maybe that's something that, comes out of this.
Right.
Maybe something we should put down for further discussion.
Yeah, I would love that. I would love to introduce that. I think there should be a couple civilians on that board, just from I don't think that a trained police officer will necessarily bring the perspective of an unarmed civilian to this. So I would like to propose that.
All right, we'll add it to our list. I would like to say that we've had 2 use of force complaints in 10 years.
I'm sorry, please repeat.
We've had 2 use of force complaints in 10 years.
Oh, wow, that's excellent. That's great to hear.
Wait, but
explain to me, I'm sorry.
There's 2 use of force complaints, but
not
there
have been more uses of force that get reviewed. Is that correct? Yes. Every use of force is documented, but it happens few and far between. No, I get it. I get that. I'm just saying. So this board only deals with complaints, or does it deal with all use of force actions? I think that's what we're going to discuss going forward.
I'm just sort of interested in, of course, in myself, in the role that the town board plays in this. So can you just explain to me, if you have a use of force firearms discharge review board, and that board, let's work with the way it's been presented to us here, that board is an internal board to your organization. And then the recommendations and findings from that board then get submitted to the town board?
Yeah, I think, so this is our committee. So my thought process is that we point out the areas of concern or areas we want to talk about, and then maybe we have small working groups afterwards to, figure that out. But I think that sounds like a good way to go, personally.
I'm just wondering, to Hermione's point, maybe the civilian engagement opportunity happens at the step where the town board is involved, as opposed to, I guess I'm just not, maybe I'm not clear on kind of what the role of the review board is and what their purview and discretion is, and whether when it then comes before the town board, is the town board, you know, confirming their recommendation, or is it already solidified before it get, you know, is it an informed versus a you know,
Ivy, personally, I would like to see the civilian involvement earlier in the process. I would like to see it before the recommendation is made, because I think that the civilian involvement could inform the recommendations.
It says the board shall carefully evaluate every situation placed before it and will submit in writing to the chief of police and town board, citing policy, compliance, and non-compliances as the case may be, and make recommendations for training, policy revisions, changing in equipment, or any other recommended course of action. That's the purpose of the board. But I mean, I think I'd like to say that I think we should develop that idea further once we're through, you know, the collaborative, you know, the guidebook, and find out how this group wants to make that recommendation, how it wants to proceed.
I'm going to say something again. And first of all, I think I should say that if I offended anyone with my other comments, I'm very sorry. I didn't mean to do that. I'm trying to speak, I'm trying to contribute. And I certainly don't want anyone to feel like I discredit their experience, but this is, I'm getting stuck again in our process. So this is where I need some help understanding. So with what you're describing, Jim, I'm not clear if this is like related to job performance or if it's beyond that. Because if the review board is involved in deciding whether or not an officer acted appropriately, I don't know how a civilian is involved in that process. But if the intention of this is just to do an overview of a situation to determine if it was appropriate based on the context, that's very different. So what is the thought process in connection to what we're trying to accomplish collectively as a group?
I think it's exactly what it says, you know, policy compliance, non-compliance, you know, recommendation for training, policy revisions, changes in equipment, or any other recommended course of action, which could be discipline, which could start a whole nother thing. So I think.
Okay, but I think that I agree with Christine. I think this is an important point for clarification, because the way that it reads right now, it's almost as if you're using it as a case study after the fact to think about whether you need to make revisions to policies and procedures going forward, as opposed to a review board to look at the particular, you know, personnel case and whether disciplinary charges need to be brought against the officer. And so it's less, you know, it's a question of whether this is a step back to look from a 35,000 foot level at your policies and procedures by using this as a case study, versus is this a disciplinary and personnel action that you're taking with regard to a particular case?
I think it's both. You know, I think it's both. I think every disciplinary action or every use of force should be those things, right? Disciplinary action should look into the reasons that this happened, and maybe training or policy revisions. So I think it actually does both. And then, you know, the review does determine whether or not, you know, we go from one to the other, whether it goes from just, you know, okay, we need additional training here, to this officer, you know, really did wrong and needs to be held accountable.
But do you have people who aren't members of your, I guess don't have standing in terms of engaging in discipline? Are they able to be in those conversations because people have, you know, privacy rights? This is where I was getting stuck with the review committee the last time. If there was some kind of anonymous alert and then concerns started coming in regarding employees, I mean, at what point is it okay for people who aren't involved in the organization to have information like that and to be involved in acting on that information?
Civilian review boards all over the world. There are civilian review boards for police misconduct all over the world. This is not unusual. This is not new. This is not novel in any way.
And you take an oath. I mean, whoever is on one of these review boards is obligated.
The only person who would, after that review board at this time, would decision whether or not disciplinary action or personnel, they could make the recommendation, but ultimately it would be my decision whether or not an investigation would go forward.
Yeah. Right, but it's important, I think, to have somebody's input, because it might be some input that you didn't think of, the rare time that might happen. So, and it would be something that you would want to consider, and maybe you'll still make the same decision and maybe you won't. But I think Hermiane's point is it may be good to have somebody from outside to at least give a different opinion of what they see.
In the educational world, people have privacy rights. I wouldn't be able to form a committee to evaluate the conduct of a professional. That's why I'm getting kind of stuck on this. I didn't realize that didn't exist in
If you go to the ACLU website, there's actually like an entire resource that you can read about civilian review boards, and that clearly explains everything.
Absolutely. It's very common.
But is this now I'm confused. The Firearms Discharge Review Board, are you then suggesting that anything like this should automatically go to a civilian review board?
Right now we're on the firearms review, and my comments about the civilian review board was because Christina Ackerman seemed, as she said, she was stuck on the fact of having civilians on that board. And my intent was just to point out that civilians are on very similar review boards.
Because this is a little, to separate out all the distinctions. So there's the distinction of the review of an incident involving a police officer to decide whether it was appropriate and any actions need to be taken place. Then there is the review of a complaint by a civilian review complaint board. I heard the word complaint a lot when I hear about those boards. Maybe I'm wrong. And then there is the kind of committee, and I'm familiar with these because of my work with people with developmental disabilities. There is the incident review committee that isn't dealing with people, but it's dealing with what happened, policies, procedures, getting better.
That's what I was trying to ask.
So there are like 3 levels of this, and where this, you could have 3 separate committees for God's sake if you wanted to. It's up to us, I guess.
I think if it's been pointed out that it requires further discussion. So let's put it in that box that we were talking about, and continue. And go back to all these things and decide or come up with how we're going to do them or what we're going to do. Good. What does the officer expect of officers who know of misconduct by any other officer? So it's required by in these sections, and I outlined the specific language. Does your department have a clear and transparent process for investigating reports? Again, it's outlined in our rules and regs. I thought, maybe for transparency, maybe post that policy on the website, but we can talk about that.
I'm just analogous to in my profession. If a police officer is aware of another police officer's misconduct, they have to report it, or they are as guilty. Is that the same thing? They are considered. They would be in violation. They don't report knowledge of a crime.
They would be guilty of violations of department policy and subject to discipline.
Can I just ask a question? Because while we've been reading this handbook, we've heard a lot about training and how, there's training at this stage and at that stage. And then when we came back, when we're at this current point of force or misconduct, and then you said that this does happen, to a really bad extent, but there are cases. So I'm just wondering, is it then something we need to relook at about the kind of training being given, you know, because this will then go hand in hand to the point of if we need a civilian, you know, it's all interconnected. So because every time we turn a page, it's about how training's given. But then we are kind of surprised that this happens in our town because it's a perfect town and nothing happens over here. So I'm trying to move ahead from this point, but I'm kind of stuck on it.
What exactly are you stuck on? Like I need a little more.
Like if you're getting so much training all the time, then why are there still cases of excessive force or misconduct? Is that something we should even, you know, and I'm not talking about the ones which were, which made it to a complaint stage. I'm talking about the ones which happen and, you know, which we don't know about.
How do you quantify that again?
Yeah. How can that be reviewed if no one knows?
Well, here is the problem. Traditionally, people of color, Black people in particular, have been very reticent in terms of reporting violations. There is what I am hearing about, people are telling me about, is just a fear of retaliation. So when, as I said in our very first meeting, if you review the statistics for our town, it will almost appear that there are more anti-Semitic episodes than there are racial episodes in our town, because there is a structure in place for the Jewish committee to report bias incidents, whereas we have never had that in the Black community. So the Black community members have not been, I myself have been stopped, harassed, pulled over, followed by the police 6 times in my first year in this town, and I never reported it. Never reported it back then. So imagine someone who is less vocal than I am, or someone who is less educated, less independent than I am. Would they even be able to stand up for themselves? So
I think we discussed that as maybe being part of our community outreach group, or how to a tangent as part of that, or maybe somebody from the CRE, becomes that liaison for us.
That's great, Chief. You know, I'm with you. I think we have the potential to be an amazing town, but there are so many people who are just interested in holding and protecting the status quo. There is no reimagining or re-envisioning happening here. Where if you ever wondered what you would have done during the Holocaust, during apartheid, during the civil rights era, if you ever wondered what you would have done then, that is what you're doing now, because we are seeing that whether it's in our town or beyond our borders, people are not feeling secure and appreciated by the police. And some of you are on this board solely to hold the status quo. And I'm calling you out. You can do better. You must do better. You people are being performative. Some of you are here to check off a box and not make changes. And we need to make changes. People's lives are at stake. And this is on you. You have an opportunity to do better, and you're not doing it. Some of you are being deliberately dense. And you know what? In the words of Toni Morrison, the very purpose of this is distraction. The very purpose of this is to keep us stuck. You can do better. I challenge you to do better. We can lead instead of shuffling our feet and holding the line on what is. We can change this. Shame on you. Shame on all of you.
What are you talking about?
I mean, that's not a fair thing to say. I don't think anyone is here just to go through motions. Anyone is here because they want to be here. They want to be part of the process. We may disagree on how far something should go or how it should get there, but that's not right and that's not fair.
No,
we may not agree on everything, but we all have a common goal to make it better. Now, what that means, I don't know.
I am disappointed because we have the ability to be better and we are doing the bare minimum. I am disappointed because I believe in you. I believe in our greatness. I believe that we can really turn this ship around. And we're not taking this opportunity. I'm sorry, Jeremy. I'm sorry. We could be big and bold and audacious and make great changes. And we're choosing to play small.
First of all, again, our role or objective pursuant to this order is to deal, at least initially, with the town. No one's saying that there aren't larger issues that are both in this town and beyond. But my response, though, is, even you referenced before, I don't know what the Jewish committee is, but that there, that's, I think we need to circle it back. We're not enemies here on the same team. We just have to figure out how to get to where we're going. But we all want to make it better. I just don't think you're being fair because we don't necessarily see eye to eye with everything or take the same positions in everything. It's just not fair to attack us, to say that, and us, I don't know who us, if it's 6 of us, 5 of us, 3 of us, that we don't want to be better. So I just, listen.
You are right. I'm not being fair. I don't want to be fair right now because I don't want you to be comfortable. I want to call you out because I believe we can be better than we're being right now. I want to challenge you to do better and reimagine this and re-envision this. You're right. You're absolutely correct. I'm not being fair. And I don't intend to be fair. I intend to challenge. I intend to challenge you. I intend to challenge us to make the world a better, fairer, more equitable place for everybody.
And so, Hermione, I feel like that's valid, and I appreciate your sharing that with us. And I encourage you to continue to challenge us. I would just hope that we're being challenged on the substance. So when it comes to particular answers and particular policies, that you push us to do more and do better with regard to, the substance of what we're discussing. And so challenging us, did you think about putting a civilian on this? Well, maybe you should. And here's the reasons why. Those kinds of challenges, I feel like I want to rise up and I want to meet you with that conversation. And I want to get into that with you. And it does make me uncomfortable, but I want to go there with you. But I want you to understand, I don't want to be challenged with regard to my intentions and my sincerity about this work. And so, I think we have to go back to where we started in terms of trusting each other and our willingness and our genuine desire to work on this. And I just hope that you'll continue to challenge us on the substance, because we need your voice to be a part of that.
Thank you for this, Ivy. And as I said, I have the utmost respect for you and for members on this team. The reason I'm challenging you is that I know that we're all better than this, but we are playing within the confines of a small box. And I want us to be bigger, bolder, and more audacious than we're being right now. I really From day one, I invited you to reimagine this, and I'm not seeing that happening. I'm seeing us being very self-congratulatory and very contented with where we are. I don't want us to be followers in this town. I want Newcastle to raise the bar. I want Chief Carroll to be known as an exceptional chief who changed the face of policing in Westchester, in New York State. And my frustration is that we're just not rising to this level. So my comments is not questioning your intent. It's not questioning your integrity. You know I love you, Ivy. It's not questioning any of that. It's just saying, I know we can do better than we're doing right now. This is hope. This is trust. This is the utmost respect because I believe in us.
But it didn't sound like that. It sounded like what you were doing was accusing us of rubber stamping something. And I would hope that you would know, not just I or Ivy, but that every single person who's on this, we're taking our time because we believe in this and we want to see changes. And we have met 3 times, I believe, and we have a ways to go yet. And I think we're just trying to get through this and identify some things so we can go back and say, okay, now what can we do to be the best and to be better than what we are now? And so, you know, I'm actually a little upset with you because your challenge, I did hear you challenge my integrity. I did hear you challenge my integrity, and my reason for sitting on this is to rubber stamp something, which I have never sat on anything to rubber stamp in my life. And I don't think anyone else on this committee has either, although I don't know them all very well, but I just think that we need to move forward, and we're not all going to be happy with what happens. And this is a process, and we need to let this process continue and open up and raise the questions and deal with the difficult things that come up and do, you know, and move on from there.
Martha, can I just say, I think what you're hearing is really basically, there are a lot of us here, and there are some of us who have had firsthand experience in some of the issues we have to deal with, and those cut very deeply. And I haven't, you know, personally experienced it myself, but I think we've got to listen to that, and we're going to hear more of that. I don't think Hermione is really necessarily questioning all of us, but I think we do have to pay attention to when her emotion or there are a number of people on the board who have had direct experiences. I think we do have to listen to what they're really saying because they actually have this experience. And it's an experience that we don't commonly get ourselves here in this town, but it does exist. We may not want to hear that it exists. We may not hear it exists through the police department because people don't call it in. And I think we just have to remember that that's where the emotion's coming from. And I think it's important for us to let it register, even if it gets a little heated. So hopefully that will clarify something. We can keep that in the back of our minds.
And Martha, I would like to acknowledge what you said. I do know you to be one of the most, I never question your integrity. I just need to make that clear. I love you. I honor you. I don't question your purpose for being on this board. But, you know, thinking about the book White Fragility, I have to use this example, and I feel safe using this example with you. Having, you know, being a part of your congregation, having you as a confidant and a friend. I feel safe using this example with you. Imagine living your life in a black skin. Imagine having someone standing on your feet for your entire life, and you ask them to get off your feet and they're like, well, I don't like the way you say it. You're a little too squealy. You're a little too rough in asking me to get off your feet. Do you see what I'm saying? I'm fighting for lives here.
But I think you need to understand that we all are. And I hear your pain, and I understand what Kim is saying, and I am open to hearing that, but you know, I'm on your side. I am on your side. But what you said just a couple of minutes ago made me feel like I'm not on your side, that I'm not here to do the work, the really tough, hard work of ensuring that they get the hell off your feet.
I have a little different angle on this. I sort of like the challenge to turn up the volume on the ideas and the innovation and the reimagining. I'm actually interested. It's almost as if it would be helpful to say, to allow us to posit thoughts and ideas that may sound ridiculous and outrageous and impossible, but could actually lead to the kind of reimagining that is in the title of the thing, in the title of the committee. And so when I, you know, Hermie, when I hear you say that, I feel more invited to let it rip, and not so, I'm personally not so bothered by the expression of emotion. Of course, I'm a social worker, so it's what I do for a living. But
and Vince, I feel like that's actually really helpful framing in terms of giving us a little bit of a blue sky challenge there, and maybe saying, you know, let some of these ideas percolate, let them sit out there, let them be a little bit outrageous. You know, I am by nature more of a practical person, you know, and so, and you know, I heard in some of the things that Dr. Ackerman said, you know, would this be possible? Could a board that had a civilian on it review a personnel issue? You know, I think my mind and her mind both started to go to sort of the practical realities of how would you implement this within an organization, because that's our role, right, to think those kinds of thoughts, right? But maybe if we sort of rise to the challenge that you're giving us right now, to say like, okay, don't just jump in and say like, well, here's the reasons you probably can't do it from a practical perspective. Just let the big blue sky idea exist out there for a little while. Understanding that, of course, we're going to have to go back. And of course, we're going to have to think about the practical realities of this, but maybe allow it to exist. And so I can live with that as a challenge. If we can just all appreciate that, you know, some of this may end up being blue sky and maybe a little bit dreamy, and that we'll agree that we will come back around and think about the practicality of it.
Well, here is the deal, Ivy, and I do appreciate what you've said. This is a mandate from the governor of the state. Throughout New York State, whenever you bring something, or the country, whenever you try to implement change, we hear the police unions won't go for it. This is just the way it is. Here is the urgency about the situation we're in. If the legislation is changed at the state level, then the police union would have to adhere to it. We are not acknowledging that this is a once in a lifetime opportunity. And we're treating it like we're playing with coins, where in fact we're playing with millions. This is our chance to say, let us change this at the state level, rather than thinking of it like, what can we get done in our individual precinct? Do you see what I mean? This is bigger than we're giving it credit for. It really is a once in a lifetime opportunity.
So I see you and I hear you on that. And I think it has to be a both and. So we can't let our focus on the once in a lifetime opportunity make it such that we can't get the work done with regard to our own department. So that's not the sexy stuff. That's not the stuff we all want to do. We'd all like to do the $1 million as opposed to the coins, but we do actually have to do the coins too. Right?
But this is a mandate from the state. It's not a mandate from the town of Newcastle. So we have to shift that focus.
Hermine, have you read the mandate?
Yes, I have. This is a mandate to get big things done.
It's a mandate to review and reinvent the Newcastle Police Department.
Right. We are supposed to be reporting on things from our town, but unless I'm misunderstanding this, the way I read the mandates is that there are going to be some legislative changes at the state level. Did I misunderstand that?
Not out of our mandate. Our mandate is to make changes and recommendations within the town of Newcastle Police Department, and then present it to the town, the public, and then ultimately to the board for them to have a resolution to make changes to the town of Newcastle Police Department.
Okay, I will go back and reread it. The way I interpreted it was that we were submitting our recommendations to Governor Cuomo.
The resolution of the town board will be submitted to the government, to some branch of the governor's office. I don't know, I don't remember exactly where. But again, it's strictly for our reinvention of the town of Newcastle Police Department. That's the mandate.
My assumption is that when they aggregate all the different ideas and concepts for each municipality that has different issues that it deals with, some the same, some different, my assumption is that, as Hermine stated, pardon me, that there will be new legislation. How could there not be? Otherwise, this is sort of this is a waste of time. If changes are not going to be made, if people aren't going to make differences and change how we proceed and procedure and laws, then what are we doing this for? This is going to get nothing done. But it does have to start locally. And I would just add that, just to close out what we were saying, you said before, we may disagree on an issue. I think when we first started, we talked about no-knock warrants. Some people may be vehemently against it. Some people say we support it for various reasons. But that doesn't mean we don't care, or we don't want change, or we don't believe in change. We just have different views and different perspectives. And my realities aren't your realities. And I understand and recognize that. I completely recognize that. But it doesn't mean that we all don't want the same end game to make the changes that are necessary. Unfortunately or fortunately, you take 2, 3, 10 people, you're never going to find consensus. There's always different views.
No, I acknowledge that. My outburst, and I'm willing to call it an outburst, is just saying, let's do better. Jim, thank you for the redirects on the mandates, but I do agree with Jeremy that ultimately there will be some statewide changes coming out of Albany. So I don't think I was too far off in my understanding of the mandate.
I mean, I agree with both of you that there will be additional changes, just like there has been a lot of changes already.
I think that I'm looking at the mandate right now, and I think we need to be a little bit less narrow. It's not necessarily as wide a net as Hermine is suggesting, but we are to come up with, yes, it starts with our police department, but it deals with general recommendations and rules and specific needs of the community. And where we are a community where there have been issues that have not been properly reported due to the fact that there is a demographic in our community that has not been reporting, we need to address those things, and we need to incorporate them into potential reform of what we've already got. So again, it's a little bit wider than I think we're being led right now to believe.
Kimberly, I absolutely think that we discussed that issue directly and we've already come up with, maybe a start to how to do that.
I agree.
And that's what I think, like at the end of this, we have these ideas and we break them down and we expand on them and figure out how to do it better.
And in all fairness to you, you have been moving us along and saying, all right, let's look at this and let's discuss this at a later time. And I agree with that, because we'll never get through it if we don't say, look, these are areas of interest that we need to discuss later. Let's write it down and do that, but let's get through the rest of it. That I understand. And you have been moving us that way.
Can we sharpen that up a little bit? Because then that puts a context on this, so that there's phase one of what we're doing is get through the manual and generate a list of ideas. Phase two is take all of these ideas and operationalize them into policies and procedures and recommendations. Is that, did everybody understand that except me?
That's what I think we have to specify. Yeah.
Chief, if I just want to ask you to add to your discussion at some point, if you would, please, since this is internal accountability for misconduct, in terms of internally within the Newcastle Police Department, is there internal prejudice against various officers? Has there been any complaints? Have there been any discussions about the prejudices that perhaps Craig might feel or someone else might feel coming from Caucasian officers?
Craig?
I don't want to put Craig on the spot. I didn't want to. I wanted to warn him, but
Craig's the man. He'll answer the question.
You're muted, Craig.
Yeah, I was trying to find the unmute button. This thing is all messed up here. So just go again with the question.
Yeah, I was just asking, because we're talking about internal accountability for misconduct, if in fact any of the non-Caucasian officers of the police department have felt any internal pressure from your colleagues who are Caucasian.
I can only speak for myself, but I think it's probably general with all of the non-Caucasian officers. I don't feel any particular pressure from my white officers that I work with. No, I don't feel that, and I don't think anybody else that works with me feels that as well.
Well, I just wonder if there needs to be at some point some kind of a survey, anonymous survey done of the police department to allow there to be voiced if anyone has if any of the BIPOC community that's part of the police department have felt any kind of bias towards them, either internally or externally. I think that would be a good thing to do.
Let's add that to our list.
Yeah, I'm sorry, Craig, go ahead.
No, I was just I welcome that. That sounds like a really good idea, actually.
Yeah, part of it, and I don't mean to say something that is out of line, and I think part of the where I'm having a hard time is if you look through the slides and look through the data, I feel like we're missing a lot of information. And so that's why I coming back to that idea of a survey or an anonymous reporting tool, I think would be really helpful in helping us shape a way forward.
And we have that as something to be looked into.
I think the your comment about the Con Ed guy, being somebody calling it in because he's BIPOC and nobody's bothered, or the person who's complaining hasn't bothered to look or care that he's at anything other than the color of his skin. And I guess that kind of granular stuff is what is not in what we're getting.
So we only know, I'm sorry, but to Martha's part, we only know because we're here in this meeting, right? So if you look at the statistics, you don't see what people are experiencing.
Right, exactly.
Correcting my language and validating. And so if there's a way to gather more of those experiences, I think that would be helpful in making decisions on how to move forward as well as another data point.
Yeah, and actually sort of this interesting trend in data, and I'm not a great data person, but the combining of quantitative and qualitative data is really the trend, because quantitative data can never capture the picture that you want to capture. Is that, Christine, is that what you meant? Like there's a lot of data missing? Is that what you mean?
Yes, that's what I'm trying, yes. In my fumbling way, I was trying to say that, which I understand was not said in the best way, and I do apologize for that. But I feel like if you look at it on surface, you don't really get to the heart of what's happening.
Right.
And how can we get to the heart of what's happening?
And, you know, I'll give you an example of something that just occurred to me as we were going through this. So you have there laid out the percentages of the staff, sort of the racial and gender makeup of the staff, the police officers that you reported. The question came to my mind is, well, what's the goal? Do we have one? Should we have one? I mean, should we have a 50% female police force, as an example? You know, so I don't know if that's even a question that we want to wrestle with, but it just occurs. Like, if you're going to have diversity, well, what is it then that you want?
Well, just a quick update from a point that was brought up last week. I have spoken to Angela Broner-Helm from the CRE, and we pretty much have a survey. I think it was brought up by Jill Shapiro last week about whether we have surveyed the BIPOC community about their interactions with the police. And the survey is all but complete. I could distribute it to the group and get feedback before our next meeting.
Great.
That would be terrific.
Can I ask a question just logistically? How would we know who to distribute it to?
So there are some key ways to get it out. Starting with the CRE would be a great idea. We also have the farmers market on Saturday, which would be a great in-person venue. We also have the BSU from Greeley, and there is a young adults group, and Recognizing Privilege or something it's called. I pretty much think we have a handle on the BIPOC community in Chappaqua.
I'm wondering, I mean, Christine, you might be able to speak to this. Does the school have the best grasp of the racial makeup of town because of your close contact with the entire town's families?
Well, you know, I've been thinking, you know, we were having that conversation about pulling over and figuring out who was being pulled over and how to report that. And when people register, one of our requirements is to ask them to identify who they are, right? But there is an opt-out. There's an opt-out mechanism built within that required by the state. But I would say probably we have the best data in terms of the community of students who've gone through and people that continue to stay in our system after they've graduated. We probably have the only database, I would say.
But FERPA protected, right? So you wouldn't be able to identify individual families.
Well, we can identify in our database because we have to do certain reporting. Certain reporting.
But percentages, you couldn't send a mailer to all of the BIPOC residents of the community.
Oh, like sort of send a specific email? Yeah. Usually when there's community surveys that go out to families, the PTA sends that for us.
It's incorrect, Christine. My daughter was listed as white. She's mixed race, and she was listed as white in the school database until about 2 years ago when she herself became vigilant and demanded and pursued the change. I was also listed as white in Newcastle. White seems to be the default. So you probably do have the best data, but just keep in mind that it's not correct. I was having a similar conversation with a child who is half Asian, half white. She was listed as white, but she doesn't identify as white. So I still hold that, yes, you do have the best data, but just keep in mind it's not accurate.
Quite a blue sky possibility is some mechanism for people to cross-check and correct it if they want to.
Yeah, you know, the way, and I can't speak to registration before I arrived, but it's up to the parents when they come in to register to identify themselves. So unless something was happening before I got here or there was some error in the input process, I would have to go back and see why, because we're not supposed to identify. We're not supposed to identify families,
right?
That you're describing. Right. So that's disturbing to me. I'm going to go back.
Families need to identify, but you can't do it.
Right.
But with the context of the racial uprising and all this, people might rethink what they did.
Yeah.
But for us, that information is really important because we have to report information to the state about our test scores and our discipline, all kinds of stuff that's monitored. So it's important that that's accurate. So that's information I'm going to take back tomorrow and talk to some people about based on what I'm hearing here.
Yeah. I still think you might have the best data though, regardless of that.
And as a result, did someone say, because let's say you aggregate the data and you can tell who the BIPOC families are by how they've identified themselves.
Correct.
And then could you could target them with a survey that we're talking about to try and get their opinion? Is that possible?
Well, I need to go, let me just bring that back with me. I mean, we don't typically send out surveys for committees. That's usually done through the PTA. That's usually our practice. The PTA will push that out to our families and their registrars. It's not something that we typically send on our listserv. So I couldn't make that decision right now.
But this isn't education related. So this is a little bit different. So it would seem to me that we'd be able to bypass the PTA. We don't need them to get involved in this.
Oh, I know, but
it's not academic related.
So when we send out emails to parents, it's usually directly related to the school system, right? So this is not connected to us in the same way. And so,
right, but they'd probably understand. They would probably appreciate the fact that, we need to get this out to the right group of people, and this is the one way we can accomplish that, or the closest.
I have a question, which is, why do we want to only send this to BIPOC members of our community? Wouldn't it be valuable data for us to understand the difference in the experience?
We're totally open to that. That's a great point. I would be happy sending it out to everyone. Once again, how we massage the data after we receive it is important. For example, I think with the last census that I have information for, Blacks made up like 1.6% of the population of Newcastle. So having people identify themselves racially, it's easy to look at the whole survey and say, well, 95% of the population have rated a positive experience with policing. But if out of 1.6% of the population, 10%, 20%, 33%, a quarter of that 1.6% population has had what they consider an unfair stop or some unjust form of policing, I think we need to have a way to break that data out and massage it appropriately.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think we'd have to ask people to, anonymously report race as a part of their response. But then it would be really interesting to be able to see the, sort of racial disparities and where those gaps are in the data. I think it could be actually incredibly telling for us to understand the difference in the experience.
Right. Agreed.
So Harmony, you going to work on that for us?
Yes. So I reached out to Angela Bruner-Helm, Kimberly, and the other members of my CRE team we had all worked together on a survey, which was never sent out because for some reason around that time, we were all inundated with surveys, but the survey is ready. I think I would like your feedback on it before sending it out, so I can forward it in the next few days and start distributing it to different channels so we can start gathering the information on it. Unless you want us to wait until our next meeting to distribute it. I'm pretty comfortable with our channels and I can forward it on to Christine. So if she is comfortable distributing it to her population as well, that would be another great source. And also through the Tongue newsletter.
I have a small concern, which is, you may have a resource on the CRE with this skill set, but have we run it by sort of a data scientist or a statistician or somebody who's going to help us to formulate the right set of questions that is going to give us the data that's actionable and meaningful for us.
Absolutely. That is why I reached out to Angela. She has that specialist on her team.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah, that's why we on the community partnerships team did not take that on. There is another team with that expertise.
I haven't even seen the final copy yet. So yeah, I mean, because another group was working on that to get it out, the communications team.
That's right. And they consolidated a lot of questions, which now doesn't really relate to the work we're doing right now. So I'm actually going to strip those questions out and keep it more focused because we're all over surveyed right now.
So Chief, are you comfortable where we are now to take up and know where we are when we take this up next week?
Yep, I marked it on my sheet. I think it's probably a good time to stop.
All right. Thank you, everyone. It was spirited to say the least, but without being spirited, you don't always get the product you want in the end. So I'm grateful for everyone taking part. Anything else before we go? Anything briefly or quickly before we take off for the evening? All right. So we will see each other next week, and everyone be well, be healthy, and thank you for participating today.
Jeremy is not.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
I'm sorry, Jeremy, what? It's in 2 weeks, right? Yeah, I don't have it down for next week.
2 weeks. My apology. 2 weeks. My apology.
That's okay because I double booked myself. Thanks, Tiffany. Appreciate that.
Tiffany. Some screens moving all over the place. I don't know where you are. But thank you.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.